Thank you for coming and welcome to the We'll Be Back session. During this session we'll hear from event organisers who have staged successful COVID-safe events. Everyone is hoping that step 4 of the government's reopening roadmap will go ahead as scheduled on the 21st of June, with very few COVID mitigation measures needed from then on. But it's very likely that some requirements will remain. During this session we will hear from the panel about their key learnings from staging COVID-safe events, what they would do differently, and how the experience is shaping the way they are staging events in the future. We will also discuss the need for flexibility in order to adapt to changes in guidance and short notice, and how that can be best achieved. I'll kick off by introducing the panel. We'll start with Ben Street on my immediate right here. He's Wild Paths and Wild Fields Festival Director. Prior to last year, Norwich-based promoter Ben Street had performed at Greenfield festivals while in the band Coast, but he'd never organised one. Unable to go ahead with his 23-venue indoor Wild Paths Festival last year, in September he organised the socially distanced Wild Fields Festival at the Norfolk Showground. And next door is Louisa Batch. She's account director at We Are Placemaking. Part of We Are the Fair, We Are Placemaking, Louisa specialises in placemaking events and handles creative strategy and event delivery for clients such as the Crown Estate, Quintain, Argent and the Grosvenor Estate. To her right we have Sam Joins, who's the Central Production Manager at DHP Family in Nottingham. Sam's worked for DHP for 13 years, where he oversees the delivery of all the live events within their 9 venues, as well as working on outdoor events and festivals including Splendour in Nottingham, Dot to Dot and the Arboretum Sunsets events. And last but certainly not least even, Andrew Evans, MD of London Concours. With 30 years experience in the events industry, among Andrew's long-term clients is Thorough Events, for whom he launched the award-winning London Concours in 2017. He now directs it alongside Concours of Elegance, and both events were staged last year under COVID mitigation guidelines. Okay, Ben, I'm going to kick off with you. Obviously, you took a really brave decision last year to kind of launch a Greenfield festival with no experience of doing so. It was obviously a socially distanced event. It was a necessity for it to be a socially distanced event. Prior to that, you'd obviously had a experience of running a multi-venue indoor event. But what led to your decision to kind of press ahead with the event?
Yeah, I think sort of brave or mad, definitely one of those two things was the main driving factor. But I think it was the opportunity to, and I think Sam and everyone here will sort of echo this feeling, to actually present some sort of musical event at a time where it was really bleak in terms of creative events taking place. And so this little oasis, this opportunity came about because the guys at the Norfolk Showground had partnered with another company called Summertime Social to put on an 8-week spread of events. And because of the sort of press and media we'd got from Wild Paths in 2019, they were really keen to have us put on the last weekend. And it was sort of a 6-week turnaround. It was a bit of a kamikaze mission. But there was a lot of artists that we were so excited about presenting in it would have been 2020, Wild Paths 2020, and this just became sort of our new focus and our new way of presenting those artists. And actually the added sort of complication, I think we discussed this before, of making it socially distanced and within regulatory guidelines, became something that was, it was an additional challenge, but it was also quite fun to surmount and work out how to do it in a unique way. So we had pods, 320 pods, personal outdoor dancing spaces, and you could pimp your pod. So the idea was there was a competition to win tickets to further events, like the best dressed pod. And people really went for it. Like some people turned up with mannequins and bunting and fairy lights and everything. So that was added infrastructure and added stress, which actually gave us another sort of way of presenting the festival. It was the festival's USP, I suppose. And although it was an absolute headache to do it, standing on the stage, side stage, Sunday night, watching Kokoroko, one of my favourite sort of new wave jazz acts, and seeing the sun going down, and knowing that the next day the regulations were going to change, so we couldn't have actually done the event, it was a really special moment. And because it was so, unsaturated in terms of events that were happening, we had NME come down, we had local press, we had local news, and it just gave us a whole new profile, a whole new platform. I'm sure a lot of people in the crowd still don't know what Wild Paths or Wildfields is, but comparatively to 2019, moving into 2021, the conversations we've been having with agents and how easy it's been to book this run has been largely because of taking that risk.
That's absolutely great. So by being that bold, essentially, your whole brand, if you like, has kind of taken off.
Yeah.
Whereas before it would have been a small, first event, that you'd have done, and it would have been probably, there'd have been so many events on that it wouldn't have stood out. But essentially, it's launched your kind of outdoor festival organising career in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I say sort of, it's a strange thing to say, but actually, the pandemic for us and the way we dealt with it and how sort of daring and challenging and risk-taking we had to be, and innovative, that's the word I'm looking for, innovative, gave us a whole new platform, and it was exciting. And now looking, chatting to Sam as well about socially distanced events that DHB have got planned, we feel so much more confident if we do have to flip up the script this year and not do our multi-venue version. We can do that. We've just signed a contract to deliver 3 months of events in a city centre garden, which is set up for both socially distanced, or if we can do it, depending on restrictions, full capacity. So yeah, we've found our sort of little niche, and Norwich is such an unsaturated, the whole region's pretty unsaturated for events. So yeah, you'll be hopefully hearing a lot more about Wild Paths and Wildfields this year.
Great stuff. Okay. Andrew, I wanted to go to you next, actually. It was a very different type of event. I mean, obviously you've got decades of experience in the events industry to sort of fall back on, if you like. But your events are very much focused, London Concours and Concours of Elegance are extremely high, they're sort of exhibitions of extremely high cars, high value cars, beautiful automobiles in great venues, and with, for want of a better, nicer way of putting it, high net worth individuals attending, and very luxurious sponsors, etc. You pressed ahead under difficult circumstances last year. How difficult was it kind of encouraging people with that sort of value of automobile to come along, to engage with sponsors and get them to commit to an event that maybe was a little bit more uncertain than in previous years? Were they the kind of main challenges, or was it literally the infrastructure side of things?
It's a really good question with multiple answers. I'll try and be brief, but for the audience benefit who don't know what a concours is a competition. It's a bit like a beauty parade, curated in the same way that you would an art gallery. So you'd get a collector in and display art on a wall, but what we do is we invite collectors of privately owned cars, many of whom have vast collections, to bring their single car to our event, and the value proposition to a visitor is come and see an extraordinary collection of cars, the likes of which you'll never see again. Come up close and personal to them, meet the owners and talk about the cars and the provenance and everything that goes behind the storytelling of the cars, and then have a great day out with us. So our model is described as an automotive garden party in the heart of the city. So that's touching various points. We're in the square mile because we want to attract high net worth working professionals who have a capability to indulge themselves around the finer things in life. So the exhibitor or sponsor profile satisfies that. So you have, last year we had 103 privately owned cars, which are part of the centrepiece of the event, and we had a further sort of 35 partners. Partners is a term we use to describe sponsorship or exhibitors. There's a reason for us describing them as partners. So my reason to run the event, we were scheduled for June. We always have a June date line, and it became abundantly clear that wasn't going to happen. So I called the venue and said, look, would you work with me and give me an alternative date, which they did in the middle part of August. At that time, I thought, okay, that's job number one done, because without a venue, you've got nothing. So we'd secured a venue date line that felt comfortable. We were hedging at this point. And as a business, we sat down and said, we're going to lose money this year. It's just a question of how much, and whether we're going to be working to lose money or just standing still and, sheltering from the storm. The vast majority of our revenue comes from sponsor exhibitors. So the gate revenue is tiny. We're not like a regular consumer event, because most of our audience are invited by our sponsors and partners. That's the model. So probably 25 to 30% of the people that come pay to come. And we only want the right people, so we actually don't want too many people coming through that channel. So sponsors are absolutely critical because they provide the revenue to run the event, they provide the audience to make the event swing. And I thought the hardest thing would be, having secured the venue, to get the supply chain to support the event because everybody was in furlough. And that was difficult, and inevitably, and I've got lots of empathy about it, the prices have just rocketed, and some contractors said, we can't service you, we're not equipped to do that, because we were going to be one of the first major events to take place in the UK. But then coming to the sponsors, when we got to the decision to run this event, I'd probably got 3/4 of the sponsor revenue secured, technically secured, meaning contracted, but it transpired to count for nothing because a number of these businesses said, it's great that you're doing it and we applaud your bravery, but we're not coming. And in some cases, corporates saying, our HR policies won't permit our staff to be at your event, let alone our customers. So of the 3 most important stages of, I suppose, postponing successfully and then running the event, the bit that I thought was secure wasn't. And it became tiresome, to be honest with you. I chose not to be overly aggressive with those contracts because I'll just be burning relationships for future years. So I gave them the opportunity to flip into this calendar year, which in some cases was wise and in some not, because some people have reneged on that. But ultimately it meant I had to start again and replenish what I'd already got.
Okay, Louise, can you just talk a little bit about the work that you do at We Are Placemaking and give us an example of a couple of the events that you were involved in last year? And I'd also like to kind of tie that, because obviously you have kind of big clients that you work with. Yeah. So how did that impact, how did the whole sort of COVID mitigation and restrictions and everything else kind of impact the client confidence and the way that you worked with them?
Yeah, sure. So at We Are Placemaking, we sort of specialise in animating public realm. So ideally, bringing sort of cultural activity to drive footfall to public spaces. So we delivered, various events over the course of last year, and essentially, as the guidance came out, we were sort of always planning for the worst case scenario and making sure that we were working really closely with our clients with any of the comms that were going out to make sure that any kind of messaging was making sure that everyone felt confident to come to anything that we were putting on. And so there were a variety of different events that we put on. So we put on a food market, which was kind of more of a contained space that was sort of in the September, October time. And then for the Christmas campaigns, we were still looking to create installations that would still drive footfall, but also make sure that people felt very safe going into those spaces. So we were still kind of activating, and people were still using the outdoor space. People still wanted to go and feel there was an energy without feeling that they were being pinch pointed into any particular sections, particularly in the higher levels of lockdown. And so we had a level of flexibility. We were always looking at different kind of tiers of planning, but in all cases we were still able to deliver with particularly creative concepts that we were looking at during the lockdown. So as we were looking at Christmas planning, it was as all the news was coming out. So we sort of always had that foresight and trying to make sure that we were planning for the worst case scenario.
Okay, and what would you say are the kind of key learnings from that experience? Because obviously going forward, well, I mean, last year everyone needed to have to sort of prepare for have a level of flexibility because the guidance was changing at short notice, and it could well again. So going into this season, if you like, or in terms of the way you're preparing the events that you're looking to work on now, how do you work around that in terms of the flexibility? What are the learnings that you can take away from last year that put you in a good place for this year?
Well, I think it's really important to make sure that people feel very secure going into the environment. So I think that essentially the learnings around messaging, making sure that there's physical presence of things like cleaning, security, high vis, so people feel like they're going into environments where they do feel that they are actually safe in those spaces. Some of the elements that we looked at, obviously we have a lot of focus around installations, is still kind of making sure that at the key and the core kind of creative concepts that we're putting in, they are still spaced and they are still able to go ahead in all the scenarios. And then essentially we can build on top of that. So for the performance elements where we would previously have been putting that in. We still plan to do that, but it just means that if we had to pull back, you can still create that activity and that buzz with a kind of expansion on what you can build to kind of really to make that to drive that impact.
Okay, Sam, and obviously, last year, DHP family, you launched a kind of new concept, didn't you, with the pop-up venue in the bandstand in the Nottingham Arboretum.
Yeah.
And you've taken. I mean, it's clear what you've taken from that because you're repeating the exercise this year,
Yeah.
and you're leaving room. Well, I think it's got a 600 capacity, socially distanced audience set up at the moment, or that's the plan.
That's right. Yeah, 600 cap as normal, but then if restrictions are lifted, we can double the capacity as 1,200.
Yeah.
So that gives some security to customers buying tickets because it can go ahead regardless of how the restrictions change in June.
What was the kind of what was the customer experience like, do you think, last year? And clearly, you're confident that you can do it again, and I imagine it was good. But just interested in the sort of feel of the event on site. What it was like for our customers, what the feedback you got on social media and everything
we
else
got
was like.
overwhelmingly positive, really. I think what we tried to do with that site is try and make it as normal as possible. I think people at that time just wanted to go to some shows, act as normal as possible with as few things in the way to what their normal behaviour as possible. So in actual fact, that site had no barriers or allocated seating or booths or anything. It was just a free flow site. We made sure there was plenty of space on site and that crowd density was managed well. And I think the feedback we got from that was really positive. People just enjoyed the fact that they could kind of police themselves, and we trusted people to police themselves. We had, I think, 10,000 people through the gates, and we had 2 ejections in total through people not following the rules. I think the experience was really good. I think it was important to kind of give security to people when they arrived. So we were quite we had plenty of signage on entry and kind of instilled confidence in the customer as they arrived at the venue. There were things that we changed with regards to kind of cleanliness standards on site and that kind of thing that we might not have done before, but now we do, which gives some extra security to people when they're arriving. And if that's the first thing they see when they get there, that tends to be kind of the overarching feeling they have while they're visiting us, I think.
Do you think there's more kind of at the moment with the insecurity that's happening around, whether events are going to be able to happen or not? Do you think amongst the public there's more of a kind of enthusiasm, for want of a better word, to kind of go to book tickets for that kind of event because they know that they're kind of covered, they know it's social distance, and whatever happens is going to happen,
Yeah.
rather than a standard festival at the moment? Because you also do Splendour, clearly, and there's lots of big festivals this year that we don't know quite whether they're going to happen or not yet, depending on insurance and everything else. But yeah, is there more enthusiasm for that kind of event?
I mean, I think so. It's really hard to get the message across that it's safe and it's socially distanced and it will happen regardless of rule changes, because the market's been so uncertain this past year and there's been so many cancellations and re-announcements and reschedules. I think the customer is just a little bit, they lack confidence that the event they're booking will actually go ahead. So it's hard getting that message across. Even for an event which is guaranteed to go ahead, it's hard to get that message to the customer that it will, because people are so convinced now that we're going to have changes. I think it's difficult to get that message across. We're just starting that process now. We announced yesterday for the Sunsets Arboretum Festival, so we'll see.
Yeah, great. Okay, Andrew, I just wanted to, obviously last year you introduced some new measures. You had to obviously introduce quite a lot of new measures. But of the ones that, were just absolute necessity and you'd do anything to avoid this year, and the ones that potentially you would, I think you spoke to me about the fact that you had staggered entry times, which in the past you hadn't done, but you're going to carry that forward because it actually worked really well. Can you just give me some examples of key learnings in terms of the customer experience?
So many key learnings I've been doing this for quite a while now, and I think I learned more in 6 months than I've done in the last 20 years. I mean, there's no exaggeration there. The first learning was be on the front foot. So in and around changing legislation, embrace the people that are going to make the decision as to whether you run or not. don't have your fingers crossed and hope that it's going to be all right, because we just didn't want to have that risk. I couldn't cope with that. But we were an event that was, bearing in mind our event's not predicated on high numbers of attendees. The London event last year was 2 days, typically 3,000 people a day, so not high volumes. But what we had to do was to work to a capacity. So for the first time, I discovered that the venue that we're using is 5.5 acres. I knew it was a big venue, but I didn't know it was 5.5 acres. That gave me a footprint. It gave me a calculation from the venue as to how many people I could have in at any one time. So for the first time, I had a click in and a click out. I had a separate entrance to exit. Everything was channeled so that you had to register in advance. No transactions on the door, because that would create queuing. I couldn't have any bottlenecks at the entrance. So that was the first learning. But the second one was, previous to last year, if you had an invitation to come, you could choose when you came. So you could come on the first day or the second day. We're now 3 days to further complicate things. But we needed to work to capacity, so we introduced ticket types. So day ticket only, Tuesday, Wednesday. We then introduced morning or afternoon, and created a ticket type that had a lower retail value as a result of that. But what it meant was we got a fix on who was coming and when, and with a tolerance around all-day invitations. So we only came close once to reaching the capacity, which was 1,900 people at any one time. We don't have a massive dwell time. It's about 2.5 hours, probably 3.5 hours if you're having lunch. So we're keeping that policy because it gave us more control. It gave us an understanding about what was right and what was wrong. The footprint this year isn't any larger, but the capacity is. So I'm up to 2,500 at any one time. And to be honest with you, I don't want any more than that, because we'll lose the essence of the event. But I would say that was a major thing: capacity and ticket types, and then giving us vision. The second thing was just over-communication to our partners, to our audience, to everybody involved. We saturated them with communication about what our plans were in terms of their safety, what the event would look and feel like when they got there. Those having lunch were paying a fair amount of money to have lunch, but we provided the antithesis of hospitality. We couldn't have young serving staff breathing young germs over a slightly older grouping of very wealthy people. So we created a bento box solution, served a fantastic 4-course meal, but the fact is it was in a bento box. The wine was on the table, you had to serve it for yourself, as with the champagne. I'm sure this is familiar to everybody. So we had to navigate new waters, and most of what we did last year I'm repeating, because we open in 2 weeks' time. There's still a bit of uncertainty about whether or not events can and should be run in the way that we're choosing to do them. But having chosen to do it last year, we've got a momentum and a confidence. So when we came out and said we're running in June, our audience knew it was happening, but short of a Boris locking London down, which is a hedge.
Okay, and how practical is it really? And this could go to anyone really, but how practical is it to run a standalone event when it's a social distance event? Obviously, with your series, it's 6, 7 or so weeks or more. You had 10,000 people, small capacity with 10,000 people. I mean, anyone could answer this really, but we go with you, Ben. I mean, how practical is it to just do a standalone event when you've got to reduce the capacity, therefore the revenue's less?
With all the different contractor costs, staging, production, anything else you're bringing in. The model of spreading it over a series of events, and Sam's experienced the same thing here, is sort of the only way of making it feasible. We just fell shy of break even, and this is only our sort of second proper year, coming into our third year. We call it 2.5 years now of running events. But doing Wild Fields, we were the final weekend at the end of an 8-week series. And because of that, every promoter was sharing the costs of the infrastructure, so the staging, all the live equipment, and also the staffing for that. And you've got this 150 acre, 5,000 sort of cap space, purpose-built Norfolk Showground, like lovely space for events. But you've got to reduce that right down, because you've got to you've got to have a level of control, and you've got to have good communication, and you've got to be able to know about the data of where people are moving and that sort of thing. So I think having the series model is really, in my mind, we're doing it again at Castle Gardens, spreading it over 3 months this time, exactly the same timescale actually as the Arboretum thing. and working with other promoters there as well who are coming in and shouldering some of the cost. It's very collaborative, it's very collective, and I think that's the only way you can really pull off these kind of events. I mean, obviously we're hoping as restrictions ease, we get back to our multi-venue format and things return to some kind of normal. But I think if you're looking at this period, these next sort of 2 or 3 months, being able to play out different scenarios, like you're saying, we can do it like this, we can do it like that, and making that very clear and communicating that to councils as well is super important. And then working with other promoters over a series of events is the only way that it's feasible, really.
Okay. All right, Louise, I'm just talking about councils. When it comes to kind of working with local authorities, I mean, how challenging was it? Did you find that you had a lot of support, that people understood the situation and they wanted to see, successful events happen in their areas, or did you have to kind of invest a lot more time and energy and process in that whole experience?
No, I found that actually working with local authorities actually to be quite supportive and wanting activity to be taking place in a safe way. So I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but essentially I think that there has been some more flexibility in terms of what we've been doing, and we're actually working on a project for this summer currently, which we've been talking about for a while, and yeah, absolutely, they want to see that kind of that content, that activity, that buzz, and for people to feel like there is something that's happening in city spaces. Obviously, retail suffered massively over the past year, particularly. And so I think everyone, does want to see that activity driving to the public realm and to have that content to go and enjoy for various reasons.
Well, obviously DHP is a big player in Nottingham. You've got, venues, you run, huge 25,000 capacity festival usually. So, I mean, you must have a history of working, well, you clearly do have a history of working with local authorities, but just in that, your experience last year, how supportive?
Yeah, I mean, we have an ongoing relationship with the council in Nottingham, so that helped massively getting the new event off the ground, and also with the Splendour event and that kind of not happening last year and rescheduling it for this year. But I think we had to remember last year that they were learning too. It was new for the local authorities as well as new for us. So actually, it was quite a good process to go through with them, because it wasn't really a kind of promoter going through a SAGE group situation where you kind of prove that you are running an event safely. It was a little bit more of working together, actually. It felt like it was a team effort to get the events over the line, which has actually improved our relationship. We had a good relationship anyway, but it's actually made for a better relationship with the local authority in Nottingham, because we've kind of had to work together to get these events up and running.
Okay, I wanted to touch on technology as well, because obviously, very slowly but surely the events industry was moving to kind of cashless tech, RFID and things like that. And there's been a few sort of stumbling blocks with RFID, but it's been sort of moving in that direction for quite some time. Cash, paperless tickets, everything else, mobile tickets. With the whole kind of, the need to kind of the distancing issue. That's kind of been, pretty much ubiquitous across the last summer. I mean, are there? Just think about technology. Is that sort of the main example of how tech's going to be used going forward, Andrew, or were there any other uses of technology that were a necessity because of COVID mitigation measures that you would now consider use or bring forward?
To be honest, I think these guys would have a more valid answer, because our event is. It's not tech-driven. The whole event environment is driven by people's passion for cars, V8s, V12s, etc. They're not really. It's wrong to say they're not tech-savvy, but we don't need to adopt tech. The one thing that we did do was to introduce, which you guys would just go, yeah, really? But we introduced a QR code that had to be scanned on the way in, and we put an option within it to tick a box to receive further information about our future coming events. I mean, as a marketing tool, that's been really successful. We knew that our data sets, like everybody's data, was being merrily eroded over the course of the pandemic, and we needed to build it back in. So a QR code, which is barely breaking news, was very helpful. We have a small retail operation around catering. They didn't use tech. I'm sure they took more cashless payments than anything else. But I think these guys probably have a more valid position to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a partnership with an ordering app. I think that's one that's kind of really an obvious one, isn't it? Being used in lots of different places in hospitality venues, and that's something that we'll continue to use. I think moving forward, it's a win-win situation. It's better for the customer, it's better for the operator. We find that our spend per heads have improved because people can get drinks quicker. It's easier to upsell. It's easier to add offers. So that's a bit of technology that we'll certainly be using going forwards in all of our venues and most festivals, I think. And I think there's been there's been a call, hasn't there, in outdoor festivals for them to be greener and safer, and for many years, and actually the progression's been quite slow, but we've had to, our hand's been forced a little bit, and we've had to really think about how we can be a lot safer, much quicker than actually we would have been if it wasn't for the pandemic, which is a really positive thing. So some of our outdoor events now, we have to think a lot more about sanitation and cleanliness, and about how close people are to each other, and about how we manage crowd density, not just at the front of the stage where everyone's standing, but at pinch points around site where previously everyone just accepted that at a festival there were crowded areas, whereas I think now when you really step back and think about it, you can mitigate a lot of that and actually have a much more comfortable experience for the customer. And I think that's something that's really positive as well, and I think you can use technology to help with that. I think Ben's going to use RFID wristbands at his events in the indoor venues in the future, and so there's loads of interesting things you can do there.
Yeah, I'd bring you in on that. I was just wondering if you're more interested now in using RFID, because I mean, that's what the selling point's been for a long time, is that you can see where the pinch points are, you can see where people are gathering, you can see where most of the transactions are happening at this point, whereas we need to get more staff there and everything else. So you're just managing crowds and staff and everything in a much more economical way. I mean, so how was your experience with it?
So we used it at Wildfields probably in a similar way to what Sam was talking about. We had people could pay with their wristbands. We had an app system. There was QR codes on the table. You could get the menu up. But one of the things that we're really interested, working with Event Genius and FestTicket, moving into, so this is something we've carried over. This is something we wouldn't have really looked at were it not for the pandemic and the obstacles that's created. We're now looking at, and I think Great Escape did something similar. I'm not sure if it was real time in the same way. We're looking at having sort of scanning stations as you go into venues, and you can sort of scan, and then we'll get the data as close to real time as possible of where these people are moving and what venues are then filling up. And for a festival that has venues of 30 capacity right up to 1,500, 2,000 capacity, being able to let people know through an app, all right, maybe don't go here because we're pretty much full, but this band who you also like are playing over there, is an amazing thing to start looking at. And we're sort of working on that at the moment. But that, again, predominantly came out because of pinch points and thinking about we couldn't have people congregating here or here. But really now the use of it's flipped, and it's much more to give the festival attendee a better experience in capturing or managing to attend the shows that they wanted to see and see new stuff that they maybe wouldn't have gone for. And that'll all be in app. So that's quite an exciting new development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Louisa, on that note, really, I mean, obviously, you saw comments about people enjoying the fact that they weren't being pushed around in a crowd, that they didn't have to queue up for the drinks or whatever, that the toilets were much cleaner than usual, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that does put pressure on events operators going forward to kind of maintain that experience maybe a little bit, but obviously lots of people want to be jumping around in the mosh pit as well. There's a different clients want different things, but I mean, from your experience, were there any kind of real positives in terms of, attendees kind of feeding back in terms of really like that, like to see that in future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I'm sort of coming back to the project we did in London in October, which was the food market. I think that generally people were really enjoying the fact that they could even actually just come out and come into a space where there was activity. And I think that particularly for the businesses in the spaces that we're working with, I mean, it's really important to spread the activity for their benefit as well. So we try not to detract from the businesses, we try and boost them. So essentially anything that we're putting in place is so that we do spread the activity around the site. So I think, yeah, definitely it benefits the purpose of why we're doing it, which is obviously to kind of bring that kind of cultural element, bring those interesting points, but also just to kind of also generate that secondary spend to the retailers. So I think in terms of in terms of like learnings, I think it's something that's sort of strengthened, if anything, that sort of angle of how you lay things out. I do think that in general we just put a project down in Southampton which is 25 different installations, and already we're seeing loads of families engaging and just really enjoying something new and something to sort of also sort of unify them with the arts and something that's in their space that they use.
Great stuff. Okay, we've only 5 or so minutes left, so I'd like to open the questioning up to the audience. If anyone has got any questions. Any hands? Thank you. This lady at the front. The microphone coming off.
Looking at sort of technology development, I suppose we've seen the comeback of the QR code.
I'll just put these on. Sorry, could you mind holding for a second? I think we're going to need to put these on. Thank you.
We're on a different channel.
I think we're on the wrong
You can hear
channel.
me.
We're on the wrong channel.
I think we're on the wrong channel.
Sorry.
Talking about tech.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So I was going to talk about, or asking about if we've seen the rise of the QR code come back with test and trace, and something we're looking at some of our events is how we use that, whether it's like engaging with local stakeholders or whether it's engaging with people coming to site in a different way. And I just wondered if anyone else had different plans, whether it's around QR codes or different type of tech outside of RFID at any of their events.
Sam, or well, any of you want to take that one?
Do you mean we've got into kind of capturing data and using it for marketing in the future? Is that?
Yeah, I suppose so. Like if that's the thing, obviously it's a really kind of difficult issue at the moment with privacy, but maybe people are more open to it now. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the QR code's made a return, hasn't it? It's like a revolution. But like the way we used it on site last year and we'll use it this year is rather than directly using the NHS test and trace QR codes, we'd use our own ones that we then submit data back to NHS afterwards, and obviously we have access to data from there that we can market to customers afterwards if they opt in to let us. And we've also been looking at creative ways that we can display QR codes on different kind of artwork or imagery around the site so that it becomes something that's interactive and interesting for the customer rather than just a routine on the door. So that's something we're looking at as well.
This is just sort of very much in trial phase, and as we were saying, everything it's playing scenarios at the moment, not knowing what the landscape's going to look like. With the app that we're building sort of in beta mode at the moment, looking at maybe having a way of uploading a vaccine passport or certificate or something, so that we're ready if that should be a necessity for people to get into these events. It's there and it's something that we can use. So I think it's really murky and trying to work out, what the test and trace situation is going to be like, what the COVID vaccine and passport situation is going to look like. I think you have to sort of hedge your bets and trial different systems. And the whole GDPR question is a really difficult one. It's a minefield at the moment. But I think the notion of a vaccination passport or a vaccination certificate is going to come more and more to the forefront as a way, as we see that it is virile or is, working against the Indian variant. It's going to be very important that you can prove that you have that double jab and that you can, and then, and I'd be more than happy to have that involved to allow us to get back to full capacity events and events that we love to put on,
That's a whole other conversation.
Sorry, I derailed that entirely.
No, but let's not start that at this panel. But,
I get in trouble.
Great. Anyone else would like to ask a question? Okie doke. Right, sure. Just one last question, actually. I could go to anyone, but Andrew, how important do you think it was that some event operators got out there, took a risk, and put these events on? I mean, in terms of encouraging, showing to government that events could be run safely, getting some of the supply chain operators to have some work, and showing the public really that it's a very professional business. that can put on professionally run safe shows. I mean, those are the three reasons that spring to my mind in terms of. But how important do you think it was that the likes of you guys made things work last year?
Hugely important, and from a lobbying perspective, I think that no matter whether you're working as an exhibition organiser, a festival organiser, or doing what I do, the public have no idea of the scale of this industry, this collective industry. The industry is disparate, which makes it a challenge, and therefore lobbying was a real challenge. And all of the bodies that did a magnificent job. But to be honest with you, I think it was critical because there are so many businesses, our own included. If we hadn't run our events, we would be forgotten. And if you're forgotten, you've got to launch again. That's how it feels. That's how hard it becomes. So to maintain a momentum and a continuity amongst an audience group that love what you do was critical. But the broader question is, there's still a lot of work, I think, for government to understand the scale of what we do and how important it is to the UK economy. And I don't think that job is complete yet, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, we're going to draw it to a close there because we've run out of time. We've got to make way for the next panel, which is do stick around for the next panel. It's bringing together some experts in the sustainability field, so leading players in the environmental efforts of the events industry, really. So that will be in 15 minutes or so. But I'd just like to thank the panel.
Thank you.